I'm Luke Scherveld. Welcome to another episode of Meet the Gaffer. I'm here with Alan Steinheimer, Shane Lewis, and we're just going to walk through lighting someone outside. That's simple. So the first thing, you come to a location and you need to scout it if you haven't done it prior. And so here we are in a backyard, and we're looking for backgrounds. We're looking for a place to put someone. We can either seat them or have them standing. If we have them standing, they'll have better energy. But if it's a long piece and you're going to be interviewing for a couple hours or something like that, that'd be a totally different thing. So yeah, just sort of talking through it, looking at this backyard. Often you're kind of looking at the most interesting background, but you're also worried about how Mr. Sun is going to affect you during that time. So if we give ourselves the scenario of this is going to be a 45-minute interview, and it's with a young person, so someone who has some physical ability, they don't need to sit down, so maybe we'll have them standing. What do you see in this backyard that sort of pulls your eye?
I mean, you know, for me, I would say 75% of my shoots, the DP wants to put the sun behind talent. And that trumps to some degree even background. And especially now with the bigger chip cameras that I see so often, a lot of times we're longer lens and basically the background's soft, you know, so.
So in this case, the sun is here, it's 20 to 10. So then that would kind of be our background. If we had two cameras, then, you know, you want to look at what's your offset. So maybe it'd be that darkness, or it'd be into the so yeah. So that'd be sort of your starter. And why would you want to have the sun behind your person?
Two reasons. One, you can soften it up then on them with overheads. It's just gives you a little bit more texture in a way, rather than trying to soften the front light on them. It's also less bright for their eyes to some degree. And then additionally, with the sun behind, basically now you have the option of all your bounces or so-called front light, you know, light that's coming from closer to camera, that you actually have a perfect angle from the sun, assuming there is sun.
Right, so the idea is put your subject facing away from the sun so that you can use the sun for your front.
For the return, basically.
What if you have the scenario where the background is the important thing? So in this situation, so like Shane, if you're looking at this and you're told, great, the sun is there, but we want to shoot this direction. Mm-hmm. Then how do you approach that?
Well, then we're looking at the sun is basically to the side of the person. So we're still wanting to diffuse that and then maybe supplement some bounce either from the same side to wrap that around as our key now more so than as a backlight, or maybe fill from the other side depending on like how bright the background is. Because if the sun's coming this way, it's also directly hitting the background. So you may need a little bit more level from that. And on small exteriors, we don't have lights big enough, bright enough, or the power or the crew size to add a bunch of light. So we're just using the light we have. So that's where things like mirrors or shiny boards and things can come in handy, because you can grab some of that light and redirect it wherever you want it. But then that means you also have to play with the sun moving a lot more throughout your day, depending on how long your interview is.
Right. Yeah, 45 minutes, not too bad. Mm-hmm. Longer than an hour, and then, you know, continuity becomes a little bit of an issue. You know, sometimes you're having to do boards into the background to try and make it look somewhat like where you started out. But the other thing, I mean, side lit's not so bad. And then sometimes what I've seen is we start out with them with a big piece of diffusion, or the biggest we can manage with whatever the crew size is. Then as the sun moves and gets flatter, assuming that that's the direction it's going on the person, sometimes I just start subtracting the sunlight as it's coming around. So basically I might leave my big soft diffusion up, but then I'm bringing in solids to keep it as a sidey kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So for a little bit more continuity and a little bit more texture on the person.
Well, just to do it, why don't we bring Keenan out here and place him in the position of where the sun is behind him, and then also where it would be on the side, and maybe we'll take some. So hi, Keenan. So come on in, and why don't you stand where Alan is, and then why don't we bring in some. We'll bring the camera in, and let's go get some pieces of diffusion and kind of play with what that would be. So. Yeah, so give ourselves a fighting chance there, but yeah, that's probably pretty good. Yeah. So then your sort of basic background is doesn't have a whole lot of definition, and we don't have any light on him yet, but that's good. So then our hottest spot is kind of that roof in the background.
Yeah.
And then with his dark hair, he takes the sun actually really well.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just put a half soft frost or a highlight above, just hand hold it and see what that gives us.
Actually, can I slide us?
We're thinking
can I
this
slide
is
him
the-
that way so he's more in front of the house?
Oh, sure.
So go
Yeah.
take a step to your left. Yeah, right there.
And then the thing is, depending on what he's wearing, his hair may be taking the backlight well, but maybe his shoulders are burning up.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's two different things, but often outside anyway, you can get away with just a nice soft. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. And then out. It's not a huge. Obviously there's a difference, but and that does help his shoulder. So take it out one more time. Yeah. So that does definitely
Takes the edge off of it.
Yeah. So, and that's really what half soft frost does, right? It takes the edge off. So why don't we go ahead and throw that in?
And it is literally the diffusion I use 75% of the time for exteriors. I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, it's nice because it maintains the directional quality of feeling like the sun, but just takes the edge off of it. It's also nice because it's quieter than something like opal, which is also very light diffusion, or even like the
Yeah, so if we
250 Luke has in his hands is very noisy.
So if we swing that off a minute, and then we just throw up some 250. It takes it down quite a bit more.
Yep.
And that's not so bad either because it's so direct and so bright.
Right.
But the half soft frost is a nice quiet.
Yeah, the noise factor of that is really often problematic, and occasionally when we ended up trying to use that, I end up with C-stands poking the diffusion itself to try and tame it from the rippling sound in the wind. All right, back in with this.
Yep, back in with that. And that's why they have silent grids and stuff.
Right.
If you're directly in line with the overhead, then of course you've got shadow on your front. But here right away, that's pretty harsh. I mean, to eye, it's not terribly soft. Here would be from the other side.
Yeah.
Out and in.
It's certainly doing the work.
Yeah, and he's got darker skin, so but it comes off pretty specular in a way.
Yeah. Well, it's a white surface. It's also relatively not that large.
Right. Right. So we could go with a much larger source, and that would wrap it, and also we could do it from further away. So let's just do an A and B with beadboard versus ultra bounce. So if you're on that side, and I'll be on this side. And so here is
Yep.
there's some beadboard. So out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In again.
We're obviously getting a bunch of green kick off of the floor here, or the grass here too, and this, there's already a lot of light bouncing around back here, which is also another thing to
Yep.
to think about.
And now here, just because we have it, here's silver side from further away.
Which I almost never use that plane, you know. It's almost always driving through a 4x frame or a 6x frame.
You'd soften it again.
The same with the boards too. It's really just a bare board is so harsh on people that it's almost always a shiny board is almost always driven through 4x or 6x or bigger.
So here's so now if you aimed that,
Watch your eyes.
and then we soften it. Am I out of frame there?
And you
You're
can also
out.
go more sidey, you know, at that point as well.
Sorry.
It's certain. I mean, I'm always weighing like what's comfortable for people, especially if you're
Try that.
doing someone who's older, who's not used to being on camera. You know,
Yeah.
actors are sort of one thing; they'll tolerate a fair amount of abuse, but regular people will squint. And I've done interviews where people are squinting the entire time, and it's like probably not the greatest look.
Now why don't we try, you do that bounce with the Ultra, and then I'll do a little neg on the other side.
And so here I am going maybe just a little bit more sidey than we were before. And again, there is a focus to these, like even just from there to there is quite a difference.
Big time.
Sometimes people will take a little mirror out right here to find the exact, you know, sweet spot. Usually you can approximate it when it's white.
Yeah, and so that's doing a lot, especially the like the skip of the sky that we feel is blue, just skipping off his cheek, or even from above. So that's doing quite a bit now, but you do have this much more kind of polished, shaped look.
And certainly more sidey because of
Yeah.
that. Yeah, yeah. So, okay. That, in a sense, we wanted to just show, often this is what you're doing when you're talking through how you're going to do it. Like you use some smaller diffusions and bounces to show the DP, oh, this is what I have, but I also have this available in larger, right? If you had the truck. This is a 42 by, as is this, that actually fits in a car, a small car, like my Honda CR-V and your Subaru Outback, right? So talk a bit about that, about sizes.
Yeah, I mean, as a gaffer, of course, you don't really like doing car jobs for the most part, you know, you'd rather have the bigger selection of tools and all that. But it is a request, and especially on documentary style stuff, even if it's not a documentary, they want that raw, you know, lighter touch, you know, brought to the whole lighting process. And a lot of times that's a car because it's so much easier to park, or it's accessible, or you have a small, you know, car as a gaffer. Usually we have a small wagon because we're hauling gear around periodically. The difference between a 42 by 42 and a 4x4 is substantial in a car. Often the 4x4 just literally doesn't fit, or you have to have a perfectly flat load to get the thing in there. So I actually years ago bought two 40 by 42 solids just for that negative fill. Nowadays, if it was interior, you could probably use something like a wag flag. But for exterior, it's actually nice to have the framed up goods.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
6 by frame also, something sort of nice and small that can fit in a car. You can have a selection of goods. It's pretty easy to put up. You might be able to get away with a single stand if you have enough sandbags. You can almost never have enough sandbags on exterior shoots. I always have a muscle cart with sandbags when I have the truck, and sometimes if it's big enough, I'll have two.
Okay, so now, just for fun, let's put Keenan here with the bright background and play with that. In this case, we've got the sun on the side, so we'd probably want to take that down from the side. And we're not as worried about backlight at all. We just have open sky. So maybe we bring in the half soft frost.
And one thing that Shane mentioned is skylight is fairly blue, especially when you're shooting in the morning and your sunlight's warmer. It does become sort of a factor. The skylight might be 9 or 10,000 degrees Kelvin versus the sun of maybe 4,000 in the morning. So you do, sometimes that color difference is okay, but it's something you want to keep in mind.
And here, now, is our background too bright?
It's right on the edge there. I mean, this is f/16.
Right. Yeah. And then you really want some fill.
Right.
So our key is basically coming from the sun, and then if we fill them in, maybe something like that.
Yeah. I mean, my tendency is to try to wrap around more than do
With your
too
key.
sidey.
I get that request more and more from DPs is fill from the key side.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
over camera even.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, because it's harder obviously because the angle you have to catch.
Yeah.
Like you might have to pan right a touch, Luke, just to catch more sun, and tilt back maybe. Yeah, so it's kind of the game of finding that, because at a certain point, you can only come around so far where it just won't do anything. But
Right.
that's still pretty contrasty where it is. But
Then I could come.
yeah,
more
so like
that.
there feels much more natural. Still a decent amount of contrast. So if you really needed to kind of flatten the lighting out a little bit
Right.
more,
Right.
then you'd have to go more sidey. Also, what you're doing here, like having it coming from higher, it tends to be my preference as well, rather than like a really low bounce that feels like, where would that come from in real life?
Right.
Kind of unnaturally low bounces
Yeah.
are a pet peeve of mine.
Well, they have a feel to them that, like, I just did a job 2 days ago and we did do the low bounce, but it was kids exiting for school. So, nominally 8 o'clock in the morning, parents handing them the lunch bag. And so the low bounce felt appropriate and signaled to some degree the time of day.
Right.
Now, it was partly inspired because on the Scout, we were there at 10:30 and we had the low bounce. It was like, oh, that looks awesome. But again, there should be really a reason for the low bounce. Otherwise, it is abnormal.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, this is definitely a usable direction too, if that background was particularly important.
Right. Right. Got to get those ferns.
And
Yeah.
then once in a while, we do diffusion for the background or solid. So if there was one particular thing that was a little too hot, you could come in and just break it up.
yeah.
I don't know what.
Yeah, or you're not in, but the ferns are in that you're
So
hitting.
you could do something like that. Not even necessarily full coverage, Sometimes just taking away a couple of hot spots is
Still have
enough.
some highlights. Yeah.
I mean, of course, the sun is moving in a 4x. You're going to have to adjust it a fair amount. There's always an argument for going a little bigger so that you see the movement less often.
Yeah.
For the overhead diffusion as well, but
Right. And so if you're compromised on personnel and gear and all that, then you'd let that kind of stuff go. But if you have the wherewithal, then you can play.
well, and as you brought up earlier, often producers say, well, hey, we've got an exterior day, can we get by with fewer people? And, my answer 9 times out of 10 is actually we really need more people.
Yeah.
Maybe it's less expensive in terms of the bill for lights. Maybe there's, only 1 or 2, or maybe there's none. But it's personnel to get the placement on these, carry all the sandbags around, and then as the sun's moving during the day, dealing with that.
Yeah.
And
And there's always wind in the afternoon, picking up around here at least. And so it's like all of a sudden it becomes a thing.
What about worst case scenario where they're like, we have to look at this, and now the sun is frontal,
Okay.
front on.
Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna look into this corner here.
Yeah.
So you're aiming. You're like here-ish maybe, and so you've got some dark and you got some light.
My main argument against this to people would probably be this person is going to be miserably uncomfortable if
Right.
the sun's directly in their eyes the entire time.
Right.
Even through diffusion, you know, it's just. How do you feel out there, Keenan? Yeah. So, and this particular camera, I can't even really stop down enough to.
Yeah. So
hold
let's
that.
bring this in, and then what you're doing is dealing with the background. And then, of course, it's how wide are you? So depending on
Right.
your frame size, are you starting to see the frame now? And it always is a problem when you're dotting the sun. Then you see your frame big time.
Sometimes we end up, I've had on occasion, sometimes on the frames when we see it as a print on the ground, is we'll end up putting branches literally on the frame so that it looks as if there's, you know, something slightly more natural than. It's mostly with the bigger frames where you see the gap between the solid frame and the diffusion. It's like it's sort of a giveaway. These 4x are a little more forgiving, except for the stand, of course. But
Right, and then they have ways of getting around that with the
socks.
socks to fill
Frame
in.
socks, yeah.
And then also, if you get a smaller frame, like you get what 11s on speed rail, so you get, and you have those, right? Or you had those, and then you bring your diffusion around with
Speed
the clips.
clips, yeah.
Speed clips, yeah. But you're not going to have that on a smaller shoot.
no, and I've never done that on an exterior shoot. Really, it's more like car stuff or something. So
When you're going to see the bounce.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Then we have to bring up our background probably, or dot this, take this down a little
Yeah.
if we wanted.
Yeah, certainly
Yeah.
the white window frames, right?
Well, I kind of part of this is also if you're limited on your resources, trying to have a nice conversation with your DP and be like, all right, if we can frame this big white wall out,
Yeah.
then we'll be able to do it with the resources that we have. So like, that's partially the negotiation side of gaffing.
Yeah.
So sometimes you don't have to take everything out. You can just do the brightest, you know, white things. You know, certainly around houses, a lot of times you have white trim.
Yeah.
So there'd be an example of where, you know, although we see the frame line in here, it doesn't really.
It's kind of, it's believable though.
Yeah.
So then if you take that out, Alan, so that's what it would have been. Yeah, so if we had to see that window frame for some reason, it's just, yeah, sometimes, especially when you're limited on what you have available, you just try to do one small thing that helps enhance the whole image.
And then if we were to add some light to the background, of course, you'd want to do it outside of frame, but, you know, if we had something,
Yeah, let me put that in a stand.
Watch your. You got lights overhead, by the way.
yeah, thank you. That anywhere in the ballpark?
Yeah.
It's just not a lot of it.
Right, the
pan right. So that's doing the most work, but it starts to feel like there's a big shiny board over there.
Right, so then you could soften this, or you could even strap a quarter silk on it.
Can you try putting it on the flower, your fence with the flowers there? A lot of times I end up with a shiny board trying to work someplace like that that's just really dark. Like you're just trying to bring it out of the mud to some degree.
Left
you
or
know?
right?
Pan right, touch. Yeah, it's doing something.
So then you might see something through this darkness. You see some light behind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this could also be a place where you would want to go slightly heavier on the diffusion for a key if the background ends up being darker. You know, like we've kind of got a mixed background right now, but if
Right.
we added more diffusion to our key, then we could adjust the exposure, open up a little bit, and then the background wouldn't be so dark, and they wouldn't be so dark. So something like a
So
silent.
that's the half soft frost. Here's full soft frost. We always started wishing there was something in between because this is awfully heavy.
Yeah,
But-
this is almost where like a quarter grid.
Yeah, the silent quarter grid. Yeah, one thing to keep in mind, people ask, well, why do we have silent, grid cloth versions, quarter half full, is for exteriors really, to some degree, that they're, you don't hear the sound. Grid cloth is extremely noisy outside if it's not the silent version.
Yeah. So that's a different thing. Now seeing the edge of this building, is brighter, but maybe we could break that up with something.
Right.
But we're getting a little bit more information in the darker parts of the background.
Yeah.
So some combination of stuff.
And then maybe you even add something. That pops from the back. Is that way in frame?
It's way in the frame.
Yeah, but other than that,
But if it looks good,
still in frame.
if you go up where there's no sun, then you'd be out of frame.
Yeah, we're not seeing it hardly at all.
If you tried
Yeah.
it from the other side, you'd probably catch more.
But then I'll probably create a shadow or something.
It's doing
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It's also like once you start putting shiny things behind, like from the complete opposite direction of the sun, to my eye, it tends to feel much more unnatural.
Lit, yeah.
But yeah, if you needed to like separate them off of the background,
Yep.
and you can do it in the subtle way, then yeah, that could totally work.
But just like looking at what we've got out here, and these are all small 42 by frames, just to give some control to our person and our setup, you need a fair amount of stands, and now the winds, you can see the wind, just on one small frame, and so it's like, yeah, you need the people, and you need the stuff if you want to have control out here. And all the other stuff that's not even in frame starts making noise.
Yeah, this is what happens on a windy day. I have a strong preference for exterior shoots to try and avoid using any C-stands when possible. Just basically all junior stands, rollers if you can, because it's nice to be able to move around quickly, especially when you bag the heck out of stuff. But junior stands with lollipops, really highly preferred. I had so many C-stands fall over on exterior shoots that it's just almost not an option.
Yeah, yeah.